Welcome back to the Lou Perez Podcast. My name is Lou Perez. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. And if you could leave a 5-star review, that would be amazing. Whether you're a longtime listener or first time, 5-star reviews are lovely. And I just might read yours on the air. How about that? A lot of big things happening. One of the biggest is I have a book coming out. It's titled That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, and it's going to be published by Bombardier Books, Post Hill Press. So that's coming out later this year. To stay up on release dates and all that, please check out my newsletter at thelouperez.com. And you can also join my community at thelouperez.locals.com. If you haven't been on Locals yet, if you join up, you get to listen to my podcast early. You'll get to watch my sketch comedy early. And also you have access to exclusive content and me. If you're looking for other ways that you can support me, you can do so by supporting my sponsors. If you're into CBD products, please check out palomaverdecbd.com. And if you use promo code Lou, you'll get 25% off purchases over $75. And if you're into cold brew, check out Black Organic Cold Brew. www.blvckbrew.com and use promo code Lou for free shipping. All right, I think that's about it. Let's go. Early on when I started my podcast, I made the mistake of having it was probably one of the best 15 to 20 minute conversations. And then I check and I said, we're not recording. And the guy,
hateful.
The guest, he was such a good guy. He's like, oh, that's fine. I could do it again. I'm like, all right.
It's never quite the same, is it?
No,
Robert Louis Stevenson's map for Treasure Island, when he drew the map as well as wrote the book, and he sent it off to his publisher, and his publisher said, yeah, this is great. I mean, it was not completed. He said, yeah, finish it off. And then he lost the map. And it's never been rediscovered. There's a map in the frontispiece of the book that Stevenson did as much as he could from memory, but it's not the original. There isn't, it's one of my kind of national treasure sort of fantasy scenarios. Is there that map exists somewhere? It's probably tucked into the leaves. You might go into a secondhand bookshop in Edinburgh one day and find an old copy of an Edinburgh almanac from 1768 or something, and there will be Stevenson's original map tucked into it.
You know, I think there's a feature film right there. You know, just
I have
tracking
wondered
it down.
about it. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not a real treasure map, but it has that. It has that obviously that kind of frisson as if it were a real treasure map, you know, and whether, I mean, there are all these kind of science fiction scenarios about who pops ideas into whose head in those sort of, Douglas Adams wrote a great one about how it was that Coleridge came to get distracted halfway through in Xanadu. Do you know that poem?
Oh,
that
yeah.
story?
Yeah. With, does he mention, or is it the Lotus Eaters is a different one, right? Or is it?
I think the Lotus Eaters is a different one, but you're right. He was into all of that, stuff. So he was in an opium dream, and then he dreamed the whole poem entire. But then he was halfway through writing it down and got distracted by a man coming to the door. But Douglas Adams wrote a scenario in which he was deliberately distracted because there were alien entities that knew he was onto something too powerful. So I can't remember the exact details, but yeah.
Well, it's funny you bring you bring up Stevenson, because I have, where is it? So I'm surrounded by books. I finally got my home office in good shape, and I have way more books than I will ever physically be able to read. You know,
totally,
but they're there, and I don't know. It is something really wild that I'm able to just, you know, walk over a couple of feet and pick up history, you know, and pick up and you know, if I had the time, if my kids weren't around, I might be able to sit down and actually read it.
It feels like that's an overindulgence nowadays, doesn't it? With the physical books, you know, like some old. There's a certain generation that refer to it as dead tree publishing or whatever, which I find really annoying. Which suggests that they're onto something. I feel like they've definitely touched a sore point there, because I've too have accrued vastly. I mean, like orders of magnitude more books than I will ever have a time to read or even to browse meaningfully.
Yeah.
But there is something about owning the book, making a decision to purchase a book that kind of incorporates it into your mental library even before you've read it. I do feel that you make a small but significant movement towards synthesis with that book just by owning it. Nothing like as much of a synthesis as I would like to believe, but I was in the world's biggest, or certainly the London's biggest bookshop today, Foyles, which I don't go into that often, and it used to be notoriously hard to navigate, but it's become more conventional recently. But it's still huge, and I was thinking, this is just such a fantastic. It's like an ocean you can swim in, and just get a sense of how much information, knowledge, and indeed fantasy and all the rest of it there is that you don't get by just like going down Wikipedia rabbit holes. You don't really get that same sort of sense of the vastness of human learning and it's really lovely to have a little paddling pool size version of that in your own home as well.
Yeah. And also, to look at the books in the historical context that they came out, because, by today's standards, we would pick up, Lady Chatterley's Lover, or Ulysses, and we'd be, and it's nowhere in comparison to what we're able to see on Pornhub.
Yeah, right.
But
it's almost impossible to believe Ulysses was banned for obscenity, isn't it? It's extraordinary that.
Well, and that's yet another one that I have on my bookshelf. I haven't read it yet, but hopefully I see something in was it Mr. Bloom and his day trip and
Leopold Bloom. That's right. Bloom. There's a day, I think it's the 16th of June, that people still celebrate every year. I'm sort of vaguely aware of it when it happened, rather than really celebrating it. But it all takes place on the 16th of June. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the cool things my wife and I did on our honeymoon, we went to two countries. We went to France, and then we went to Iceland. And when we were in France, it was going to be my first time in Paris. So me being a fan of literature, I had to go to Shakespeare and Co. And I'm such a huge fan of Ernest Hemingway's short stories in particular, and I read A Movable Feast. So to be walking, through, and it's not that big of a shop, No. To be walking through and to know that, Ernest Hemingway was here and Gertrude Stein, and I think Joyce popped in, and F. Scott Fitzgerald was there.
Yeah.
It's these are real places, and they hold, almost a supernatural architecture. It becomes, in a way.
Well, it's interesting that, because in my experience, 90% of the time when you try and achieve that, when you make a pilgrimage to a place, it can be an anticlimax. But bookshops, for some reason, they stay alive, don't they? They hold it. They hold the only other one that I've been to that isn't a bookshop, there's a cafe called Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, where people like Joyce and also I think Lenin and I believe Freud and the Dada movement all kind of congregated, and it can't help but be a bit of a museum of their having passed through, but it still functions as a sort of bookshop cafe. It still feels pretty rock and roll. There's a lot of sort of gummed up posters of anarchist, rock groups and what have you. And I mean, it's obviously weird because Switzerland is like just the most obviously high end alpha, like corporate stroke capitalist, like the most perfectly functioning oiled machine. So it feels like it's a bit of a token gesture on Zurich's part to sort of fence that off.
If you're, I think if you're going to be a revolutionary, if you want to plan a revolution, do it in style. Go to a place that, go to a really posh place and, enjoy the food and, let the revolution happen, in your mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure even like at 1900 and 1910, that Zurich had that vibe too. I don't think it's not somewhere that's kind of like Singapore that's only just sprouted in the last few years. I think it was long understood to have that. It feels like a real hub. But yeah, Paris has places like that as well. They're wonderful. And I did go to one in San Francisco where there's a famous one. Is it City Lights?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it was a publishing house too. I think that they may have published some of the
Ginsberg and stuff.
And Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who I think I think he just passed away. He was like 90 something.
But I have to be honest, I suppose I was more of a tourist there because it's not really my favorite kind of literature. I used to enjoy Kerouac, but you kind of get the vibe. Whereas that whole Paris scene was a bit different, wasn't it? Did you see Woody Allen's film Midnight in Paris? It was quite an interesting.
No, I haven't.
It's an interesting exploration of the fantasy because essentially a man discovers a wormhole that allows him to visit 1920s literary society in Paris at will, and he gets to know young Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and I can't remember who the love interest is, but maybe Anais Nin, I can't remember. But he then gradually he lets on to them that he has this wormhole, and they all want to go back 50 years and visit Toulouse-Lautrec, the Impressionists. And the kind of theme that emerges is that there was always like a golden generation for whoever, that they look back and think, oh, if only I'd been born then.
Nobody's going forward. Nobody's going to the future.
No, that's a good point, actually. I don't know. I don't feel a huge amount of confidence or enthusiasm for where literary art will be in 50 years' time. It feels like it's almost expired already. But having said that, other things come through all the time, new ways that people can express themselves. So I think that is part of the the way we shed our skin, isn't it? Our lobster shell or our spider skin,
Mm-hmm. I wonder if, and I'm sure that this, is dependent on the individual, whether or not someone wants to go forward in time into the future or back in time. And I think for me, I would be more comfortable going back in time because going forward, I'm going to be pretty sure that everyone I care about is probably not going to be around. Then also there's just the unknown about what's to come. Whereas going back in time, it's almost like even if you're the worst, student of history, you have a general idea of what was happening back in the 70s or back in the early 1900s. And so you kind of go back with, I guess, more wisdom than you would, kind of going forward.
Well, it's a really good illustration of what the nature of wisdom is, isn't it, to some extent? Because if you were to go back, I mean, if it were just to be a long weekend, I could definitely pick out a few places I would love to go back and have a long weekend in, Renaissance Florence or maybe watch, I'd like to stand next to Hegel and watch, the world spirit on horseback riding past. But if you were to actually re-enter history at that point and then live out the rest of your life, then you have a whole different kind of collection of clamoring confusion. I remember when I was about 25, through a sort of bunch of circumstances I wasn't really in control of, I ended up doing a 10-day meditation retreat in Nepal. I was already traveling in that part of the world, just like kind of taking, allowing myself to blow like the breeze and got talked into it. And anyway, this the kind of guru who ran it would be done in total silence during the day, and then in the evening you get like a recorded tape, an hour-long discourse from this guy S.N. Cuenca, his name was. He had a wonderfully deep, resonant voice, and I think a Southern Indian, and clearly quite an intelligent and wised up kind of individual. And they were very funny, these discourses. They were just taking the piss out of you most of the time. He would kind of go, so what have we learned? Monkey mind, chattering mind, cannot be quiet, can it? Monkey mind, chatter, chatter, chatter. And it was like really
you with the beard, what are you hiding under the beard?
Yes, exactly.
It's like, what?
I loved him. But one thing he really emphasized was, it's a well-known aspect of Buddhism and similar meditation-derived belief systems is that attachment is the root of all suffering. And he said, in particular, attachment to just the way things are, and aversion to change. And he said, this is bound to lead to unhappiness because everything changes, everything is in flux, everything falls away, and even things that appear to you to be solid and reliable are no more so really than a cloud that you stare at, and 1 minute it reminds you of a dog, and then you realize it no longer reminds you of a dog. And that's just all it is a question of the scale of time. And I remember thinking in my mid-20s, so I don't care. That's fine. Let things change. I have nothing that I'm clinging to. I'm up for that. That sounds great. Otherwise, things would get boring. But now I'm in my mid-50s. I feel a little bit differently about the world. I think about that quite often. There are things that are falling away and changing that I can't seem to can't seem to hold on to. And I don't just mean my kids growing up. That obviously is something you sometimes think. You look back at old photos, when they were at certain ages, when you realize perhaps you didn't stop enough and really pay attention. Right. And those years aren't coming back. But also just, epochs in our history, aspects of social cohesion that seem to be evaporating now, and I don't have any way of holding on to them.
Yeah, I recently watched the documentary Get Back about the making of Let It Be. Did you happen to see that? Did you?
I watched about 2 hours out of the 5, and I mean, like, full disclosure, I like the band, but it wasn't my favorite period of their music, and I've never been that fascinated with how they fell apart. So yeah, and what really took me aback from Get Back was it was so intimate, just the world that I was being led into. Like I was spending a lot of time with the Beatles, and I watched I watched the whole thing in its entirety, and something that really stuck out was one, Paul McCartney's work ethic. The man was just constantly writing and fine tuning and all that, and then the camaraderie with all 4 of the guys joking around, and while writing, what's considered some of the greatest, music. But also what stuck out to me was, I think Paul was maybe 26, and he was writing these songs where lyrically it seemed like an older, more wiser man was writing them. It was almost like he had a sort of a wormhole, if you will, to a much more mature man. Because even going, before the Get Back album, a song like Yesterday, you have a kid in his 20s writing about the longings for yesterday, and it's something that that doesn't hit, isn't it? Those lyrics, especially. I mean, the tune came to him in his sleep. I think his a lot of his stuff. Funny enough, I got his book for Christmas, so I haven't opened it yet. But the lyrics, the big sort of hardback thing that's come out. But the thing about McCartney is his gift for melody was so absurdly divine. I mean, he's like the Mozart of pop, that it sort of obscures some of the other aspects of what he might be trying to say with the music, or how experimental and interested he was. He was the one who was more interested in the French philosophers, wasn't he? Continental philosophy and stuff at the time. I know John Lennon is always associated with like stop the war and ban the bomb and social issues, but actually McCartney was much more intellectually curious at that time. He was an absolutely extraordinary individual, and because he's all like thumbs aloft, and he was the good-looking one and the one that the girls felt safe with, and he had the big shaggy sheepdog and stuff. It obscures a pretty extraordinary mind, really. I think he was one of those people who managed to conceal an awful lot of intelligence and curiosity and wisdom, definitely. I mean, he was 24 when he commandeered the whole band, essentially, which would have fallen apart otherwise. Lennon was totally like blitzing himself on LSD and God knows what else, and produced Sgt. Pepper, which is just remains just such a unique artifact in 20th century culture, let alone like inventing a whole new possibility with guitars and drums. So, you don't do that just out of like bonhomie and a knack for a good tune. There was something pretty special going on with him.
Well, there's something to the ability to experiment, or the willingness to experiment, that is something like Sgt. Pepper. And I think you being a comedian as well, I don't think enough people can really understand just how important it is to have an environment where you're able to experiment, try new things, fail, and see what happens. Where there seems to be a lot more stuff seems to be a lot more sanitized. Like, we're getting more experimental when it comes to technology. Like, I'm sure we're going to have a human animal hybrid in a few years. But I don't know.
Alex Jones will tell you we have them already.
Yeah. So some of them right now, they're all in they're lining up, coming in. Yeah. So we're going to see that kind of experimentation, but as far as, possibly seeing, another, Sergeant Pepper or something that's of equal, stature, or that world.
People experiment early on, don't they, when they have less to lose? I mean, personally, as a stand-up, I was doing improv just for fun, really, because that's all you can do improv for in the UK, really. And somebody said there are these kind of workshops where you can try stand-up comedy just in front of other people who want to try it out, and you just go along, and it's a little safe space, And I did it there, and that was how we did it early on. You would write a piece, and maybe one or two bits would get a laugh, and lots of it would fall on dead air. But nobody cared, because they were all, and afterwards they would give you hopefully constructive feedback about why they had not gone for that bit, and right. You learned as much as anything else who you were in their eyes, as much as whether a particular joke was funny. It was finding your viewpoint, it's finding where people understood and felt you were authentically coming from. But of course, once you get to be, once somebody's paying you a few grand to do a corporate, you tend not to take the risk of skating out into the thin ice, And it's extremely important that as comedians or any other kind of creative endeavor, you have to have places and times, and ideally, parts of the calendar year that are set aside for going somewhere and taking huge risks. And as you say, ideally in a room where people are capable emotionally and intellectually of providing useful feedback about why they responded the way they did. Those are extremely valuable and rewarding. But it's funny, I mean, I'm listening at the moment. I listen to a lot of audiobooks rather than read these days, because I just find it less tiring. And I'm listening to this one. This is a kind of history of philosophy, history of the Greeks mainly. It's called The Dream of Reason. And it's quite interesting just how badly wrong most of them were. Right. These kind of huge names like Protagoras and, even Plato, who are held in almost godlike esteem, ironically, given that that's what they were kind of trying to pick apart. We're just way off beam loads of the time.
Well, anytime someone talks about, he's a philosopher or he's a philosophy major, I'm like, okay, but what does he believe? Let's talk about what his actual beliefs are, because I'm not to take anything away from philosophy majors, but you could skate by in a university.
My wife did philosophy at university, and without any disrespect to her, it's not how I would categorize her now as a philosopher. She works in public relations. I think possibly she learned some communication skills, but rhetoric is arguably a part of philosophy. But I don't know how many people who study philosophy are encouraged to come up with their own original ideas. I have a sad suspicion it's not a major part of the course anymore. And let alone kind of really just flinging paint at the canvas and seeing where it takes you, But so much of important innovation is like that. It's not just in the creative arts, not just like comedy or music. If you want to make a better steam hammer, you have to be able to fail 1,000 times.
Yeah. Yeah, if anybody wants to look at patent records, and you'll see like, so and so invented this, and then you look, it's like, no, so and so made some adjustments on this other invention, and so on and so on and so on.
Exactly that. And then one or two people, usually with a good PR, kind of remembered 100 years later as being the guy who invented. Extraordinarily slow incremental improvements made over 100 years, very often with things that we think were invented as such. Yeah. It's interesting, that guy who's been, what's his name? The bearded mRNA guy that Rogan had on his show.
Malone, is it?
Malone, that's it, Robert Malone, And a lot of the degree to which people are trying to delegitimize him is that he claims he invented mRNA vaccines, and they're like, nobody invented them, and you'll be, and he may well be exaggerating his contribution, but it's interesting how that can become in itself a political lever one way or the other, depending on whose side you're on, whether you assert somebody has the right to speak, or whether you undermine their claims to some kind of inventor status.
Yeah. Well, I guess one of the popular things now is if you say something that, kind of goes against the grain, you could be asked, well, are you a doctor? And then when you turn that around and you ask the other person, well, are you a doctor? It's sort of you have now you have two people who aren't doctors arguing over whichever doctor they choose to cite.
Yeah, exactly. That's all any of us can do in the world these days, isn't it? You can read somebody who's been struck off, somebody who had a number of patients die under them. Well, then you can legitimately say, okay, this guy's record is not great, but most of us can find at least a doctor who agrees with us, or is willing to support that. As far as the COVID thing goes, there are plenty of doctors in the UK who don't think that you should be like issuing vaccine mandates. I mean, that's just like a very straightforward one. Literally thousands of them signing petitions saying they don't think it's right and proper. So you can always find people who will support your view. And the appeal to authority, they call it, don't they? But it's an interesting thing when it crops up on Twitter. You must have seen that, where people come along and go, "Hi, epidemiologist here."
Right.
Okay.
Well, I've been, sometimes you come across people, especially on Twitter, where for one, you want to ask, a professional, an MD, why are you even spending time on Twitter, especially if they're spending most of their time just fighting with people, because, the goal of an internet argument isn't to win. It's just to waste the other person's time. And you can be wasting. But I think recently I saw an MD who I don't know if she was bragging about this, but she had a teenage son who I guess he rolled his ankle and his ankle was all messed up. And rather than bring him to a doctor or urgent care, she was basically just going to ride it out because she was afraid that he would catch Omicron, the Omicron variant.
From being in the waiting room sort of thing?
Just from being in the waiting room or just being among other people. And this was a doctor. She's a blue check. And I just, as somebody who I had a baby in 2020 at the height of COVID. So when it was still alpha, this was alpha COVID we were talking about. Yeah. And at that point in my life, I was so scared, so paranoid, and just reaching out and just trying to find any good news that I could possibly find. And then when you have good news coming in, it's like, oh, great. I get to live my life. And now I have my two jabs. Wonderful. I feel more comfortable going out and all that. And now we're at a point where, because of this Omicron variant, that this woman doesn't want to bring her child to a doctor for his ankle. Meanwhile, this kid is, I guess if you look at the numbers, he's going to be okay, even if he gets it. And also, he's probably going to get it at some point.
Yeah. In fact, you almost want him to get it earlier because it keeps going in a straight line, doesn't it? It's one thing. This is obviously illuminated is the degree, the wide spectrum, I suppose, of different risk. And response, that humans are capable of, and it doesn't seem to necessarily correlate with your professional experience. You would think a doctor would be able to say, "I can understand why people are afraid of Omicron, but I've done the reading to that very basic degree that I know a 12-year-old boy or whatever is not going to, have more than a nasty cough for a couple of days. That's the most it'll be."
Yeah,
but it's clearly something much more emotional than that. I wonder whether it's always been there, or whether it's a human thing, or whether it is. It would be quite easy to make a case that it's elevated by exposure to 24-hour news cycles and so on. I'm sure you've heard of the amygdala, which is the little part of the brain that was just always sitting there waiting to be activated by social media and moral panics of one kind or another. But clearly, mankind has had these kind of things before. There was one. What was it? I remember where it was. I think it was in America. I think it might have been in somewhere like Oregon, where a panic swept around the town that there had been like a lake or a river had broken its dam and the place was about to get flooded, and everyone just panicked and left town and went and sat on the mountaintop. And 3 days passed, and clearly nothing had happened. It was just a rumor that had got out of control and had never been verified, and nobody had bothered to follow it up, and they all just kind of sheepishly returned to their houses. Never spoke of it again. It just feels like a very easily mapped onto our present situation kind of story.
I could imagine somebody saying, well, look, we put the work in, we left the town, we got to knock that dam down. That dam's got to be knocked down. It's got to come flooding through. Recently, I listened to, I believe we have a mutual friend, Brendan O'Neill from Spike Magazine. And Brendan had a really great conversation on his podcast, The Brendan O'Neill Show, with Carl Hennigan. And Carl, towards the end of the podcast, he said, quote, when people are enacting on society behaviors that reflect their own risk. So, and he was saying it to describe what we've seen over the past 2 years with responses to COVID, where you have people, and the way that he put it is like a lot of the people who are in charge tend to be in a higher risk category for COVID, and therefore they are then enacting all of these different policies, even on people who aren't in that risk category.
I think there's an even more pernicious dynamic in the same vein, but kind of in reverse, which is that those same people tend to have jobs which are less at risk by the enactment of the policies that they are keen on. And that isn't just the government, and that isn't just the medical community. It's most importantly, it's the media. Those people who sit on the couch on the TV screen and say, listen, you just got to stay home. It's not so bad. Just stay home, work from home, watch the TV, for a few weeks while we flatten the curve. And 18 months later, they're still asking you to do that. And you think your job is, if anything, you are in higher status now. Your status as a TV host, daytime TV host, has been elevated by this panic. Whereas a lot of people who rely on serving cheese over a counter or something have just felt their world fall apart, but they have no status, they have no purchase, and they have no voice. And it's not to say anyone is being evil, but as you're saying, it's just, it reflects their own priorities and their experience of the thing. They are not threatened. Their status and their earnings are not threatened by lockdown, and those are not people who should be making that call.
Yeah, and I've seen other people, who look back and say, if we had just paid everyone to stay home for 3 weeks, and it's, well, they're obviously not talking about the doctors, the nurses, the people delivering food, the people
delivery
food.
Drivers,
because you pay just, if you can even afford to pay everyone to stay home, well, then things stop moving. The things
we all have that fantasy. I think it's kind of like, Joan Didion with the Year of Magical Thinking, that we all have kind of magical, that we start making bargains. What would happen if we all just went into suspended animation and just kind of just get by on fresh air for a bit? I mean, to be honest, if the government had just furloughed everyone who could conceivably be furloughed for 3 weeks, and then we'd eased it back, that wouldn't have been the worst thing that could happen. I mean, that was kind of what I was braced for in a way. It was when it went on for 18 months that I couldn't quite believe that we had fallen for that. But now there are new normals that some people seem to want to adhere to. And I get the uneasy feeling that some people are really quite comfortable always wearing a mask now on public transport, that they are never going to feel that it's safe to take it off again.
Well, there was a study out of, was it Cardiff University, that 43 women found people more attractive with wearing a mask.
Yeah.
It's real life satire. It's real life.
That is really odd, isn't it? I think there are certain kinds of masks that can make people attractive. Obviously, your kind of Venetian sort of, those with a lot of lace and like kind of cat style. I can see that there's something about anonymity, but not like those kind of just like 90% of the masks that I've seen people wear just look so weirdly sort of dysfunctional, even as masks.
Yeah.
Also, they don't look like they're form-fitting. They don't highlight anything. They look as if they've probably been coughed into from the other side. It's horrible.
Well, that's the thing. I think the one of the lead, scientists who did the study or the polling, he said that the reason why is the women were associating masks, I guess, with either health or a lack of disease. But me just knowing how I treat my mask when it's in my pocket and then it's coming up, it's.
I know. You walk out, you leave the house some days, and you go, "Oh, have I got a mask?" And you start fishing in your pockets to see if there's an old mask in there, right? It's
well for me, it's almost
disgusting.
It's almost the equivalent of like women finding condoms on penises more attractive.
It's exactly like that.
It's like okay, it doesn't read it reads healthy or no disease, I guess.
I mean, I understand why women would find clean fingernails attractive or washed hair, but it's moving way into the pathological zone.
And you wonder how much of it, like even the idea that somebody would do a study like that, and like it was only 43 women. It's almost like, oh, you are a part, or you want there to be the new normal. You want this to be the new normal.
And then the newspapers will carry that study because they want to kind of support that notion as well. Yeah, it's quite sinister. I mean, it's hilarious, but also quite sinister. And I'm sure you're. I'm sure you may not be, but are you a fan of Jordan Peterson? Or moderately? Yeah, he's a very controversial figure. Obviously, I think sort of a lot of people willfully misconstrue what he's interested in. But one thing he certainly is interested in is the rise of Hitler and how it came about. And he gave a very interesting lecture. This was years before he was famous, when he used to just put a camera at the back of his lecture theatres in Toronto, about the degree to which Hitler's disgust reflex was a huge part of his personality, and that drove an awful lot of his thinking. That he was motivated by a physical, visceral dislike of dirt under fingernails, dirty hair, infestations of vermin, and so on, and that Peterson and I both obviously have to emphasize, although hopefully it wouldn't need saying, but he wrongly associated that with Jews, with Jewish.
I'm going to cut that out. I'm going to cut that out to make it seem like Simon and Jordan Peterson. Right.
Disgusting anti-Semites. Yeah. But and certainly that was kind of how he sold it to some extent as well. But he made this point, and it's chilling because it's long before the recent pandemic, that at times where people fear contagion, when they become aware of disease and contamination in their neighborhood, they veer massively to the right politically. They suddenly start seeking a strong authoritarian rule that will clean up the neighborhood. That whole kind of clean up the neighborhood, which is kind of euphemistic for lower crime, but it's not coincidental that the terminology used is really that of hygiene. That's how people feel it and experience it. And, we've seen it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And something that I keep reminding anyone who will listen to me or will read what I'm writing or my tweets and all that is, if you don't have it, you can't spread it. If you don't have it, you can't spread it, because when you look at just the way people have approached masking, the idea, like, if someone's not wearing a mask, therefore they have to be infected. Or recently in the United States, there's some stupid controversy about the Supreme Court. Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch didn't wear a mask, and I guess all the other justices were wearing a mask, or one justice ended up doing a Zoom meeting. I don't even know what.
I saw that. She said she'll be doing it from home from now on because Gorsuch won't wear a mask. Yeah,
but apparently, but even on that, apparently there wasn't any fighting or arguing even among them, or asking him to put on. I don't know. But the reality is, if he doesn't have it, he can't spread it. And we have tests that people are taking. If you want to go to that, level, and this one of the silliest things to come out of vaccine passports, when we were, when people were debating whether or not those were a good idea or legal to begin with, is, well, now you have people who are vaccinated who are infected, who are still catching this. So just showing a vaccine passport doesn't even mean that you're not infected.
No. It's really intriguing the degree to which they fudge and obfuscate, and I've never seen anyone give any kind of clear indication as to what extent being vaccinated lowers the chance of you being a carrier, of being a vector. I'm willing to believe it might do a little bit, but nobody seems to be willing to share any kind of statistical evidence. So I have to be a little bit skeptical. It certainly isn't a binary on-off,
Right.
Yeah, and this is why I think, it's the same with Djokovic, obviously, which was the most recent example where he clearly wasn't a vector. He wasn't a threat. It had been established. Not only did he not have it, it was established that despite not being vaccinated, he was full of antibodies because he hadn't been vaccinated, but he caught it for, quite recently, and he was full of antibodies. So he was zero threat.
I didn't know that he had the antibodies. Wow.
Yeah, he totally does. Yeah, I mean, he had tried to. I think that there was, I don't know. There's some evidence that he might have tried to pull a fast one with the visa form or whatever. But he was certainly, by the time the row had reached its climax, he was certainly in the clear. So, they said that they didn't want him. He had become a sort of focal point for the anti-vaccination movement. I guess that is also the issue that this judge has with Gorsuch, that he's somehow kind of making a kind of totem of himself somehow, as a sort of he's almost like, I don't know, it's like he's kind of parading his mouth. What obscured facial features?
Well, yeah, you think
some sort of offense, some sort of insult to polite civil society.
Yeah, if people really worried about others becoming like the totem or the avatar of the anti-vax movement, the people they really have to be worried about are all the people who caught COVID and lived. Yeah, because all those people, oh my God, you can catch it. It's possible that so many of these people caught it and lived. That's not good marketing.
But really shrugged it off. I mean, it's a provocation. Again, Rogan is the key one with that, isn't it? Where he not only caught it, but he then used his ivermectin. I don't know where. I doubt it made much difference with him. I think it would have just bounced off the sides either way. He's in fantastic shape.
People wanted him to die. People wanted him,
or at least to be humbled. At the very least, to be humbled and begging. The no atheist in a foxhole kind of moment. That's what they wanted. Right. That's what they wanted to see. Will he convert?
Yeah. No, he did not.
He did not do so. Well, the other one, of course, we've all forgotten, was Trump, who was helicoptered off to the hospital. I can't remember what it was he took. He had some kind of, there was some, was it remdesivir or something? There was some kind of semi-experimental treatment for it that he took, and it absolutely rocketed him back out again. I think there was a degree of risk involved. 3 days later, he's back there kind of.
My country has been through so much. It's just been, it's been incredible. And we forget about, I forget about those times, like the guy, while he's running for running for re-election, gets this disease, beats it. Yeah, and then we just forget about it and just move on to
beat it really quickly, because Johnson, meanwhile, Boris Johnson, our prime minister, he was touching at one point. Yeah, well, I mean, some people don't trust the information that came out. I'm inclined to trust that the information management did their best to stop anyone panicking, but there were moments. That was very early on. It was only about 3 weeks into our first lockdown, and there were moments when you thought this could cut a swathe through the whole of the ruling classes. They're the sort of people who go to lots of parties, shake lots of hands, lots of air kissing, and Prince Charles had it as well. And it was scary. That was quite scary. Like, that could have actually really undermined people's not just confidence in the medical infrastructure capacity, but that's actually, it's almost like feeling like a child again, isn't it, when mummy and daddy are fighting or something? Do you know what I mean? If you start to see half the government going down,
right?
It's
like
not normal.
If even they can get it. Was it Edgar Allan Poe has the short story Masque of the Red Death?
Yeah, exactly. I thought of that many, many times. Yeah, that's where I think Australia is still at the moment, really. Maybe not the vainglorious dances, but the attempts to keep the castle gate locked.
I really appreciated. There's the editor of Quillette, Claire Lehman, she got a lot of backlash because I think, she was standing up for her country and and the way that they've been handling lockdowns and all that. But I really appreciated she shared a bunch of pictures of women in quarantine in bikinis. They were having a great time, and I could understand if I was a young woman, beautiful woman in my 20s, in a bikini outside in Australia, I think I'd be all right too.
Yeah, it does feel like it's a slightly better place to sit it out, doesn't it? I don't know. As you probably know, I wrote that piece for Spiked about the Djokovic situation, which I tried to keep as kind of focused on matters of principle rather than detail, because you just don't know. Different countries experience things different ways, and it's so easy to share a little bit of social media footage and think, oh my God, there's terror on the streets, somebody getting clubbed with a rubber truncheon or something, just for not having a mask on. And then you learn it was something else entirely. You can't trust half of what you see.
Or you learn that it's from 10 years ago.
Exactly.
And it's like trying to relive that. Well, what is it? So you're a columnist for Spiked, and I've written for Spiked. For those of you who aren't familiar with Spiked magazine, please go and support it. It's fantastic, and I describe myself as every now and then when they want a guy with a funny accent to write something, they pick me. They pick the Yankee to go do that. What is it like, being English, but then writing and commenting on so much of what's happening outside of England, whether it's the United States or Australia?
Spiked is a tremendous platform, I find. I wrote a few pieces. I think I was writing for something called The Spectator, which is a little bit more, has been the house magazine for the ruling right, I suppose, for quite a long time for the Conservative Party. Since, I think, about 1770 or something like that, very old established magazine. Spiked has a much more interesting and checkered past. It started out as something called Living Marxism many years ago, and it had quite an extreme left, or at least the people who run it and launched it were on the extreme left. But they have evolved, I think, and become genuinely interesting, questioning, anti-authoritarian, but not like ludicrously libertarian. I wouldn't bracket them with like kind of Charles Murray libertarian thought, and certainly not a Michael Malice sort of anarchist thing. They just question any attempts to limit human freedom and question their legitimacy. And I think it's a really excellent platform. And I was so chuffed when they invited me to write regularly for them. And the other great thing I find about it is just zero interference. I mean, I don't think I've ever written for anyone where there's been so much editorial freedom. There's one or two things I've pitched to them and they've said that isn't quite us. That's different. But if they ask you to write something and you write broadly according to the brief, then it goes in, which is just fantastic. And at pretty much any length you want as well, which is great. Obviously, that's an advantage of the digital platform, but still, it's quite indulgent. So, I mean, I find it really, without any exaggeration, I think it's a huge boon to my own mental health, to be honest, to have and I know that's quite, that's nice for me, but not everyone can have that, obviously. But to be able to write at length and kind of get my own thoughts in order, the experience of writing 1,000 words on a hot topic of the day is just I don't think there's any better way to organize your own swirling, mental weather. And I just feel much calmer and better afterwards. And then I have 48 hours when I have to wait for it to actually be published. And then I'm a little bit antsy there.
I get the same way. It's the same, the excitement. I'm checking, refreshing Twitter to see if they're tweeted
exactly.
it out.
Oh, there it is. What have people said? How dare they?
But
it's fantastic. And I mean, all my favorite writers, certainly kind of thinkers, whether I listen to Christopher Hitchens' essays a lot. He's probably my hero in terms of prose style and just organizing a column and just keeping it funny, but putting in lots of uppercuts and straight jabs, but also a little bit of tickling as well. He's just brilliant writer. I wouldn't agree with him on a lot of political issues, but that almost feels by the by once the moment has passed. You're always just looking back at the history and just seeing that it's just a glorious unfurling tapestry the whole time. And I just think it's a great discipline to try. It's a great tradition to be a part of in a tiny way, in the same way that as a stand-up I'm part of a tradition that included many of the most vital, curious, energetic minds of my generation, and now this is another one. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I think Hitchens is definitely one of those figures that a lot of people say, I wish he were around, because I can only imagine what he was. And I think a lot of the people who say they wish he was around to comment don't necessarily know what he would say, what his commentary would be. It would be very original. And I know that came out especially during the 2016 election in the States, Trump running against Hillary, and then also, obviously through Trump's term. And I'm not too sure which side Hitchens would have come down on, because he loathed Hillary Clinton. He
wrote a whole book about it, didn't he?
Yeah. So
right.
I mean, so the idea of having, to some people this would be just sacrilege, but the idea of Hitchens in his beautiful tan suit with a red MAGA hat on, I mean, there's just something there that.
I wonder whether he would have gone. I mean, he was famously going on that journey which concerned a lot of people as far as radical Islam was concerned. I mean, he was really taking no prisoners there. And the Middle East generally seemed to have swung into being an unapologetic hawk. But yeah, Clinton up against MAGA. It's been very interesting watching a few people like Glenn Greenwald, who I didn't really pay much attention to until the last couple of years, to be honest. I knew what he'd broken with Snowden and stuff, but that wasn't one of my chief occupational interests. But he's not alone in having gone on that journey and starting to think that the great mass of liberal media and the attempt to control the narrative and Silicon Valley and their increasingly kind of dictatorial approach to their own platforms and so on. I wonder whether that would have been something that Hitchens might have been. He might have been in that vein. That's one possibility, I think, But there are other people that I suppose he was broadly in alignment with. I don't think he would have been that keen on the what do they call it, the dark web, the intellectual dark web, or the Peterson and Sam Harris and all of that, those guys.
I think that's disbanded, especially.
I think it has. It flared up briefly. It was one of those classic examples. Barry Weiss, wasn't it, who named it that, or at least I think she was interviewing Brett Weinstein and he suggested it, or maybe Eric Weinstein. Eric, right. There's a great guy called Parkinson, Cyril Northcote Parkinson, who was a sort of thinker and economist and a bit of a humorist in the 50s, who wrote a book called Parkinson's Law. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Parkinson's Law itself, there are about 12 different laws, each one illustrated with a short sort of essay. The most famous one, which is usually just referred to as Parkinson's Law, is that work expands to fill the time allotted for its completion. Have you heard of that?
No, but can you say that one more time?
Work expands to fill the time allotted for its completion. So if you think you have a deadline to finish a story by Thursday, it will take until Thursday to finish it. But if you have until this afternoon to finish it, you'll do it this afternoon. And it won't be necessarily better or worse. He applied that actually to the size of departments, which there was his original observation was that the Admiralty, as it was called, which is the sort of civil service, the bureaucracy in the UK that was concerned with the running of the Royal Navy, was continuing to grow after the Second World War, despite the fact that the number of ships they had was shrinking dramatically. In fact, they had one of the world's great navies as we went into the Second World War, and it was now, very much running on a skeleton budget. But the civil service was continuing to grow, and he said, how can they find any work to do? And he investigated it, and he found that they just create their own work. The more people you have, the more interconnected they become, and the more things have to be signed in triplicate and so on. Anyway, another one of his laws, which is the one I was thinking of, is that as soon as you name something, as soon as you identify it, and especially as soon as you give it purpose-built premises, you have effectively killed it. It won't continue to grow in the same way, and it might even immediately start to wither. And I think the intellectual dark web was a very interesting natural outflowering and interconnected development of alternative voices and thoughts and heterodox opinions. But as soon as it became the intellectual dark web, its days were numbered.
Yeah, and if it was already definitely waning over the years, and I think the infighting over responses to COVID, I think that definitely just put the kibosh, because I know there's sort of a kind of a love triangle of Brett Weinstein, Joe Rogan, and Sam Harris, who have all on their respective podcasts kind of been taking issue, I guess, with everyone. Actually, I don't know if Joe Rogan is taking issue with either, but I know Harris and Weinstein.
Harris came out very strongly against Trump as well, didn't he? I mean, he kind of lost his mind slightly about Trump, I think.
I have to say, there was a fantastic podcast episode I recommend everyone should check out. It was between Sam Harris and Andrew Sullivan, and they spent probably around 2 hours, maybe a little bit more. And the
on
first
Harris's network, or
on I guess it's Waking Up with Sam Harris, and the first hour was all the reasons why you shouldn't vote for Hillary, and they went out, they tore Hillary apart, and then the second hour was why you shouldn't vote for Donald Trump, and I think they really did such a wonderful job. Having that discussion, bringing those arguments to the fore, and two respected guys who both respect each other, and two people who also despise Trump, but could also, show what was wrong with Hillary. But I think after Trump won, I think it was sort of, that was it. So.
Just give me 1 sec. Sorry.
Yeah.
Wife came in from book group. Dog wanted to join wife.
Do you know what book they're reading? Do they tell you?
Yeah, I do actually, because she wanted my copy to borrow. It's David Sedaris. Remember him?
Okay.
I don't know if you remember him. Funny guy.
Yeah.
Me
New
Too
one?
Pretty One Day, which is at least 15, maybe 20 years old, I think. Yeah, about learning to speak French. Yeah. Which is quite an interesting choice, partly because it's quite an old book, and also because it's not very open to endless discussion. I would have thought it's just very, very enjoyable and funny, but I guess they like to keep it light.
My wife and I, we watched a documentary the other night about Jackie Collins, the sister of Joan Collins, and a world-renowned, I guess, romance, erotic fiction writer, and it was a great documentary. It was the Boss Lady, the story of Jackie Collins.
Was absolutely huge in her day, and it's one of those kind of names. I guess it's that kind of genre where people just flare up and then it's gone. 10 years later, nobody remembers. But she wrote books. They were erotic, but they were also a little bit Ayn Randian. They had that there was always that sense that there were certain people in the world who just used the power of their determination to cut through
to get what they want. Once we start talking about Jackie Collins and erotic fiction, my camera cuts out.
Sorry, mate, lost you there. You're back.
Yeah. There you go. You're frozen on there.
I think it was me, and I don't know what happened. I don't think I could blame the wife because she's only just come in, but I don't think she did anything.
No more David Sedaris book club for you.
No, there's.
Yeah. But
Lucky Santangelo was a big fat pot boiler about a sort of mafia type guy. And I read it in a single day. I was flying from Athens, and I arrived too early to do it, and I just sat in the airport and read an entire book in one day, and it was one of the best days of my life. I remember that.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. There's something, there's something I think people in the creative arts, they could stand in their own way when they have these really high aspirations of greatness. Where sometimes it's sometimes what it comes down to is get the work out there and let's see if people like it. Where for one, I'm sure if Jackie Collins knew that people were reading her book in one day, I mean, that's something. Yeah, that is something.
You get value and you immerse yourself. And it's one of the reasons I like Audible, actually, because you can get through a book in a day. I can now, which I really would struggle to do that just using my eyes. But if you put it on your headphones and you go out for a long walk and you listen at double speed, you can absorb a book. And there is something to be said for that. Not all novels, obviously, benefit from being sort of gulped down in that way, but some do. There's something, it's like, nobody would watch a movie over several weeks or something. So there's something, I mean, we all have the box set kind of binge weekend now. So it's quite nice to read books in that way as well. But as I say, it does, for me, it requires Audible because otherwise I'm just always back skipping. I'm paranoid I've missed something. I don't feel I'm paying attention enough, and quite dysfunctional on reading now, which is a shame. It's funny though, I was just thinking as you were talking there about let's get it out there. I can't remember his name, but you referenced, is it Tim Pool? Was that the guy? Or was it somebody else? You referenced in your Spike column about Saturday Night Live, some comedian who had...
I talked about Kyle Dunnigan and Ryan Long. Those were...
they're podcast guys, but there was...
Tim Dillon. Yeah,
Tim Dillon, who had a go at Saturday Night Live, and they were like, "Oh, you're just jealous." And you were saying he makes over 100,000 a month now on his Patreon.
Yeah, there was something like $190,000 a month on Patreon. That means that and for those of you who don't know, Tim Dillon, podcaster, stand-up comedian, and in my piece, I have a little history with Tim in that when I first started doing stand-up comedy, I was probably like a year or two in. I did this show in Great Neck, Long Island at a fondue restaurant called Simply Fondue. And it was in the back of a fondue restaurant. No pay, but I could get, 15 minutes or so, which at that time was, I mean, even now is huge to be able to do that and to be performing in front of real people. And that was the first time I saw Tim Dillon perform. And I think he had just started out. And part of the what I write in the column is that at the time, if you were to ask, either me or Tim, what does success look like? I'm sure that we would have said being on SNL. I mean, that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
But now if you ask me what success looks like, sure, being on SNL is definitely a success, but being Tim Dillon, having an audience, having devoted fans that are willing to support your work to the tune of $190,000 a month, on top of following you wherever you're performing live, and you have them, and they're devoted.
There's a new level of loyalty that people have. I mean, there are one or two comedians in the UK who've developed that online. There's a guy called Richard Herring who's been working on his online community for well over a decade now and is well ahead of the curve on that, but it creates all kinds of different products, some live events that get recorded that they get advance tickets to and so on. You have to be pretty smart, and you have to work very hard. You also, of course, have to be talented. But if you are willing to do that, you achieve a degree of integration with your audience that I think, no TV show ever. Well, I don't know. People used to have a huge amount of affection for the big stars of the 70s when there used to be massive mainstream. We had people like Morecambe and Wise. I don't know if you heard of them. They were like a double act who performed on, they'd be, Christmas Day Morecambe and Wise specials are legendary in this country. More than half the population would tune in. They had viewing figures of over half of the of the entire pool. Yeah, it was absolute. They were absolutely huge, and they were very much part of the national fabric. There's nobody like that via TV now. There's nobody who has that level of universal appeal. But the flip side is that you have some people who are, to die for their king.
Yeah, and there's something too where there are so many successful people out there, right? That you don't know about, that I don't know about, where people, one of the put downs that I think is probably one of the weakest that I see is when people are like, "Who are you? Who's this guy? Never heard of this guy before." And it's like, well, look, there are people, today who have no idea who Paul McCartney is. There are people who don't. Well, there are people who don't even know who the president was. However many years ago. You
probably have a show. We have a show called University Challenge. I think there was a similar one in America. I don't know if it's still. Anyway, sure. It's like it's very highbrow. You get 4 students versus 4 students representing their university, and the questions. I mean, the running joke is it's like ogle bogle woggle bogle, buzz Aristotle, correct? But But at least a third of the questions are scientific that we genuinely don't understand the question, let alone know what the answer is. But then every so often they'll go, okay, we're going to take a music round now. I just want you to tell me the name of this band, and it'll be the Clash or the Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin, and they don't know it.
No clue.
They don't know it. These kids are like, I don't know, is that Bob Marley? What? That's what?
Yeah. London Calling. It's not Bob Marley.
I think it literally was that.
Oh
actually.
my God.
And so you're exactly right. People, I mean, they have an extraordinary breadth, these students. I'm not accusing them of being over specialist at a young age, but everyone has blind spots now. And for me, I guess it would be those people who play video games for money on YouTube,
Yeah,
I know of PewDiePie, but none of the others.
Yeah, that's a different world. Well, I remember
hundreds of them.
a couple of years ago, my wife, we had like a big outing with her parents, my brother-in-law and his wife's parents. I think it was maybe like 10 or 12 of us. And they got tickets to see this comedian who I'd never heard of him before, Michael McIntyre. I'd never heard of this guy before.
Right.
And it's at Radio City Music Hall, packed, sold out. Never heard of this guy before. He comes out and he does an hour, right? And then he has an intermission. And then he does another hour. And then I think he went backstage. He got like a standing ovation, came out and did another 20 minutes. I'd never heard of Michael McIntyre before. And I had never seen a comedian do that, to perform for basically like 2.5 hours. And
is that unusual? Because that in itself isn't that unusual in the UK. He is huge, or at least he was. I think he's still pretty huge, but he has definitely become a bit of a game show host now. I always thought he was unfairly dismissed as being a little bit lightweight. He's actually a very, very clever, astute comedian. But he did become huge out of nowhere. But it's interesting that he is in New York as well. I didn't know that. Yeah,
I think he might do like a show once a year or something like that in New York. But there's something too in watching him perform. Obviously not all of his jokes landed with me or whatever, but to appreciate somebody who knows how to perform, who's a professional, who's obviously has decades of this under their belt. I think that's so important. And
he was quite interesting and unusual in the UK in that he was on the circuit for a while, by which it's a slightly different circuit, but playing 20-minute sets in clubs on a mixed bill or whatever, and not really getting anywhere very fast, and a little bit unpopular because he always seemed to think that he was a bit bigger and better than everybody else, and he was going places and he had ambition and a manifest destiny, and we were like, okay, whatever, and then suddenly,
and then he did,
I don't know, whoosh, just like in about the space of about 2 or 3 years, suddenly he was playing Wembley Stadium. It was extraordinary.
Wow.
And he suddenly switched it on. He located the fusion reactor in the heart of the whole thing. But brilliant extemporizer, very, very good with the audience. Incredibly kind of warm and just like totally inoffensive, which is what some people find a little bit suspicious. But
they find that offensive. They find that offensive that you're inoffensive. Well, I remember some years back, when I was living in California, I drove down to San Diego to do 2 shows. And if anybody is ever looking to drive to San Diego, don't drive on a Friday during rush hour because it takes around 6 hours to get there. But on the show, the headliner was he did like a juggling act, and I think he had some props and that sort of thing. And one of my biggest regrets is at the time being a little stuck up about what I thought comedy was.
Yeah,
and he actually paid me a compliment. He said, really great set. Really not really great set. He said, good set. And I got to be fair. And I thanked him for that. And I really regret not talking to him and not, picking his brain and just because this is obviously he was headlining. People came to see him. Yeah. And I think I missed out on learning something, on getting some wisdom from somebody who's obviously been doing this for a longer time. All because, the guy juggles. He does magic. He does a little bit of magic. And
There always was that little bit of snobbery about special acts. I personally have always liked them. In fact, I got into comedy more through going to watch people like that. There's a place called Covent Garden in London where they used to have the Piazza, which is probably a bit like Venice Beach or whatever, where you have just outdoor acts juggling and would have a 20-minute sort of routine with maybe breathing fire or clubs or whatever. And I just love that stuff. I have like childlike wonder. If somebody can manipulate physical objects with a degree of grace and ingenuity, that's good enough for me. The other thing I love is voices. If people can do good impressions, I don't really care how good the jokes are. If it sounds like the other person that it's meant to, I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah. You're communicating with demons. How did this happen? You've taken their soul somehow. Yeah.
Anything that I could never do, I love it. Close-up magic. I love close-up magic. And there are lots of people who are very snobby about magicians and think they're weird and it's just a manifestation of a spectrum disorder or something. But I'm like, no, this is they have the capacity to reintroduce childlike wonder into my life. That's exactly what I want to happen more often.
There's a magician named Prakash, and he was doing a double a partner act with this guy Matthew Holtzclaw, and one night Prakash was working a room just doing like at a party doing close-up magic. And he did this one trick to me. And I looked at him and I said, Prakash, I know that this is magic. I know that this is an illusion or a fake or a trick, but you're really scaring me right now. Because it was just something where it's like this doesn't feel normal. The childlike wonder he gave me was childlike fear of
no, I have had that as well. Well, certainly where you just go, there's skill and it's like it goes on a smooth ascent and then somehow it's broken and now it's way up here somewhere, which is way beyond what I can see how you can get from there to there to there through practice. Yeah. It's extraordinary stuff, and I never want to know how it's done. But the only ones that annoy me are the ones like Derren Brown is a great entertainer. I don't know if you know him, but he does have this kind of habit of he's a British magician, and I mean, I guess he works in that kind of Penn and Teller field, slightly kind of teasing you with like, this is how it's done, or these are the tricks we use, and those are not the tricks you use. He's telling you a load of lies about the tricks you use. It's a further part of the act, which is it's all show business. But I think you don't need to do that. You don't need to pretend that. This is the mind game you played, and this is how you planted the idea in my head earlier to say the 7 of clubs. It's not. That's not how you did it. You've used traditional magic techniques, and now you're presenting it as a sort of almost like a self-help book or something. Like this is how you understand. A bit like it's a stand-up show business version of Thinking Fast and Slow or something. You're supposedly accessing some kind of understanding of the human psyche, and it isn't that. It's accessing mechanisms that work rather than I think I can plant the idea of a certain kind of animal in your head suggestively by walking in a certain way.
But before we go, I want to talk to you just a little bit about something that I've been seeing a lot in stand-up comedy is almost meta stand-up comedy where the stand-up is talking about what they're doing on stage, in particular if it comes up with matters of free speech or what you're allowed to joke about and all that. And I can't wait to get to a point where comedians stop doing that and just do the work, just do the material. I know that's where we are culturally, and I whether in England or in the US, like, hey, I know we're not allowed to say this and blah, blah, blah. But man, I want to just get away from that.
There are two kinds of that, aren't there? There's what sounds a little bit like a kind of right-wing version of it from the way you discuss it, which is like kind of going, I guess I'm not allowed to say that anymore or whatever. And then there's, I don't know if we have a guy called Stuart Lee, who's a very, very clever and gifted and has been very creative comedian for at least 25 years now. But he does a lot of that. When he makes a TV show, he does a bit to the audience and then he turns to the camera and goes, listen to that. They're not laughing, but they are clapping. That means they agree with me, and it's quite clever and it's a good commentary, but it is a little bit tiring after a while, and then there's that other stuff like, did you see, what's her name? I'm always forgetting her name. Tasmanian lesbian comic, did a show called Nanette.
Yeah, Hannah Gadsby. I watched
Hannah
both.
Gadsby, yeah.
I watched
yeah.
both
So,
Nanette and Douglas, which was her second one.
Okay, I haven't seen Douglas, but in Nanette, she talks a lot about about comedy and how she uses it to diffuse tension, but she's tired of doing that. She wants other people to have to live with the tension that is created by her sexuality or whatever. And I was thinking, it's an interesting, like a lecture, but that's not a stand-up comedy set. I wanted to see some stand-up comedy, and instead you're discussing the degree to which stand-up comedy failed to work for you as a therapy. And that's not what I thought it was, Yeah. So there's a kind of people trying to use it in different ways. But I think you're absolutely right that the best way to do it is just get people helpless with laughter. I mean, that's such a hard thing to do and such a worthwhile thing to do, that to think you can be kind of arch and above all of that somehow by discussing it on stage, even as you're clearly trying to do it, but to sort of, I don't know, diffuse the tension created by your failure to manage it.
Right. Yeah. And I watched both specials of hers that are on Netflix, and the second one, Douglas, is more comedy. It's more comedy than it is lecture. She talks a little bit about Nanette. But one of the problems that she has in Douglas is she basically opens up by letting the audience know what they will be seeing throughout for the rest of the set. You're going to hear a joke about this, and then I'm going to do this and do this and do this. Now, clever if you can pull it off, but you've already let the audience in, and to let us know what we're going to see, and then when we get to it. Well, it didn't really work, There
has to be some reason for that, doesn't there? Otherwise, you've just transgressed a fairly basic rule.
Yeah. Like for example, she ends she let us know that Douglas is going to end with a joke about Louis C.K. and also a mic drop, and then we get the joke about Louis C.K. that isn't very funny, and then we get an unearned mic drop, and it's like.
Yeah. It's not for me, so I guess I wouldn't watch it. But if there's one thing I can live without, it's knowing her opinion of Louis C.K. at this point, especially,
Yeah.
Christ, I thought Louis C.K. was a brilliant comic for quite a while, and I was pretty disappointed with him, when I heard what he'd been doing. But I wouldn't put it anywhere near the category of like rape or the kind of Weinstein sexual coercion if you want to get a part in this movie or whatever, Yeah, I just felt sorry for him. I don't know if I'm allowed to say, I'm doing what you're saying now, but I don't know if that's a cancelable opinion, but it just made me feel a bit grubby on his behalf. Really, I hadn't met him, but he had made some extraordinarily raw, vulnerable, exposing comedy about himself. This wasn't a guy who presented himself. There's that very funny bit about Norm Macdonald does about Cosby, isn't there? Where people say, that bit where he says, people say the hypocrisy was the worst thing, because he presented himself as this kind of like upstanding moral figure, a father figure for young black men. And it turns out, he goes, I don't think that was the worst. I think the raping was the worst.
The raping was the worst.
Yeah. But with Louis C.K., he's kind of like the reverse of that, if you see what I mean. He's like, there's no hypocrisy.
Yeah,
he has been all but telling you that he's the kind of sad sack who would actually sit in the corner of a grungy dressing room backstage at a comedy club and ask if people minded if he masturbated. I mean, there's no lower place for a human to put himself than that. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't know. It doesn't excuse
I remember however many years ago when the article came out in the New York Times where it was going through all the different cases or the instances that Louis C.K. had with these women, and I was reading it and I felt like I don't need to know this, or it's not my place to know this. It seemed like it was very much between him and these women, and with some of them he had made amends, and more than anything, I think what came out of that was sort of this idea that the public needed to choose whether or not to forgive him. And it's like, that's not my place to forgive him. I have that's not, we don't have a relationship. I'm not one of his, one of the women that this happened to, or that, so that was weird. It was very weird, it's sort of it was a public shaming, but then people feeling as though they were entitled to decide whether or not this man is forgiven for the sins that he committed.
Absolutely. And that's become a big feature of social media, but it already wasn't. But ever since, I guess, it's just endlessly pushing that line now, isn't it? That we meet, everyone is involved in a great reckoning that will never end.
Yeah.
We have to find out where you are on the table of all of the humanity that has ever lived.
Right. Well, Simon,
it's a bit like when I don't know if you're ever on a Patreon. Patreon, Peloton, the online cycling sort of.
I've never done it. I don't think I can afford one.
No,
so.
My wife spent our entire budget for lockdown on one of these. Anyway, when you ride, sometimes you're in a live cycle, and sometimes you're against historical people who've ridden in that exercise thing. But there can be thousands of people on the leaderboard. So you've got a digital leaderboard, and you're up and down. And obviously, I'm sometimes racing against 14,000 people, and if I'm having a good day, I might be in the top 3,000. Otherwise,
wow.
I think of social justice as a bit like that. On a good day, I'm only 3,000th.
Right.
To where my ranking is.
Yeah, they're coming for you, or you're coming for them, or
These people below owe me, but I owe them. But
right.
There will be a dispensation. Yeah.
Anyway, Simon, I owe you for doing this and for staying on. I know it's a little later where you are. I really appreciated it. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Simon's work, it's Simon Evans. He's a comedian and he's a columnist at Spiked. Please check him out on Twitter. That's where I think he and I first found each other. And I'm never going to let him go.
It's been a real pleasure, Luke. Very
awesome.
Nice to meet you, man.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. Again, please subscribe, leave a 5-star review. That would be lovely. Keep your eye out for my book, my forthcoming book, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. And please sign up for my newsletter at thelouperez.com. And if you want to support my work, join the Lou Perez community on Locals. That's thelouperez.locals.com. You'll get access to all my stuff before anybody else, as well as exclusive content, and of course, me. Be sure to support my sponsors, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Use promo code LOU for 25% off purchases over $75, and Black Organic Cold Brew, BLVCKBREW.com, promo code LOU for free shipping. Okay, I'm going to keep that in.